to do. So I want to ask you, how many of you had a good week this past week? Yeah, all right, some hands raised. Okay. Some good things happen. Is that why it was a good week? What's that? Vacation. Something good happened, vacation. Any of you had a rough week last week? All right, more hands. All right. Hey, maybe you could both raise your hand and for both. Like, vacation's not always easy. You guys have kids. So vacations are not always vacations, right? When we reflect on our life, I think we always think about the things that happened. And we kind of evaluate, how did my week go? And if someone asks, how was your week? You kind of think of, well, what happened? And based on what happened, how did I feel? And how does it set me up for what's going to happen this week? You kind of evaluate the current events of your life. And maybe this is just me because I'm introspective sometimes. Do you ever think about the things that don't happen? Do you ever sit and wonder of like, this could have happened, but it didn't? You ever think about, man, I chose to stop at that yellow light this time. Some of you guys don't stop at yellow lights, do you? But this time you did, and did you ever wonder, what if I didn't? Would I have gotten in an accident if I didn't stop that one time? Or what injuries have my kids avoided because I safe-proofed my house and I put the knobs on the oven knobs and I put bumpers on the coffee table? Like, what ER visit did we not have this week because I chose to pay attention to my kids' safety this time, right? This time. What are the things that aren't happening? How did I not end up on the side of the road because I decided to fill my car with gas a little earlier than normal, right? There's things that we just do mundanely that are routine, but they're these faithful parts of our life that we carry out, and we don't always think about, well, what doesn't happen because of how I live my life this week? What big things didn't happen that didn't make my life more dramatic than it already is or could be? Right? We don't always think about what doesn't happen. We don't always wonder about those things that aren't there. We look at the obvious big things or even simple things, but what happened and how are we feeling? And we look at what's in front of us with our eyes and with our emotions, right? But sometimes, man, those things can really make or break our life. There are things that, man, if I didn't stop at a yellow light one time and it led to a car accident, that would drastically change my life. I'm not throwing out guidelines for you on how you drive. I'm just saying I wouldn't be here right now if something happened to me this morning on the way in. And I think, what conflict at work might not happen the day you call in sick rather than pushing yourself through or whatever, right? Like we don't always think about how our lives orient around these small little moments, but the decisions we make matter, and sometimes the things that we don't even realize God might protect us from or that our days are changed from the small little decisions, those could make or break some big deal thing in our lives, right? Any movie lovers in here? All right, I saw Steve this morning, so I know he is. Yeah? Okay, me too. I think when it comes to a good rescue story, the progression of a story matters. We get into it, right? Like you can tell a good movie because it keeps your attention. And how does it keep your attention? It's dramatic. There's a lot happening. There's either humor or there's action or there's love and romance. And there's things that kind of drag you along through the movie. If the movie was just boring, mundane things happening, it wouldn't be entertaining, right? We love when the hero wins just before the clock runs out, right? 24 fans? Jack Bauer has a way of keeping us on our toes, right? Or he did. It's kind of old school now. But that's why I said you got to kind of be a TV movie fan to follow along with me on some of this. And yes, as a Christian who's a movie fan, I can find godly analogies in all kinds of shows and movies. So I'll keep bringing them your way anytime I'm up here. It's fun. But when the world is on the line and everyone sees the hero win the day, like there's this big joyous moment when good triumphs over evil, right? No matter what kind of movie you're in, like if there's good versus evil and good wins, we get excited. And the more dramatically that it happens, even in my kids watching like a Toy Story movie, right? Like it somehow finds a way to get you on the edge of your seat and wonder, are they gonna make it? They do, but they make it so entertaining. They draw you in because it's dramatic. These big things happen. But in real life, I feel like the moments that actually save something, where the course of our lives are most affected, don't look like epic movies at all. In fact, while we like drama in movies, we don't like our lives hanging on to the 11th hour in every single moment we're living through. It's not fun for us, is it? We like to see that on TV because it's fake and it's entertaining, but in our lives, we don't really want to live in the dramatic and in the edge of your seat moments all the time. Like you can get an adrenaline rush sometimes, but it wears you out. It scares us. Like it's a way of life that isn't survivable long term. Most of the moments that really matter don't look like these epic movie stories at all. And half the time, the things that really matter most in our life, no one even knows that they happen, right? I think my kids are 4 and 6. I think of their baby phase. There's a lot of parents in here, you know what life looks like to lay it all on the line and no one's watching because you are pouring yourself out for others and you don't always get seen by doing that, right? There's a lot of jobs you guys have, a lot of relationships you have where some of the most important things in our life aren't these big epic things, but they matter and how you walk them out really matter. And so today, we're starting this brand new series called More Than Free, where we're going to dig into the book of Exodus. If you know anything about the book of Exodus, the biggest story there is the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt get set free. Moses raises his staff in the water. He's telling Pharaoh, let my people go. There's these big epic moments that happen, and the Israelites gain freedom. But I think there's more to the story than just escaping something to feel free from what was. There's more than that. God has more in store for us, right? God doesn't just save his people from Egypt. He saves them for more things that are yet to come down the road. Exodus chapter 19, starting in verse 4, God says this, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. For all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation." Right, this passage kind of describes what this series is all about, where rescue isn't the finish line, but it's more so the runway for the future that God has in store for his people. Sometimes, again, I think we're stuck in something and we're asking for freedom. God, deliver me from this thing. But most of the time, God's story isn't written to get us free. It's to kickstart us into something more that he has past that freedom, something more for our lives that he has on purpose for us, for our future, right? God brings the people out of Egypt. He leads them to himself, and then he sends them on more journeys even after that. God has a bigger story in mind than we sometimes realize. So I want you guys to think about something right now. What would you love God to rescue you from in this season? What things are you facing? You're like, man, I wish I could be free from that. I wish I could see God show up and bring rescue in the middle of the thing that is going on in my life or my family's life right now. It might be a situation, could be a diagnosis, could be a relationship that has had its struggles, could be a bad decision that keeps haunting you from your past or even your current season of life. Could be a state of mind, right? Sense of fear or sorrow or things that you've walked through and you're like, God, I just want to be delivered from what I've been facing in this season of my life. So hang on to that longing, and then I want you to add another question to that. God, if you were to bring deliverance and freedom in my life from this thing that I'm facing, what would that be for? What would you be doing in that to lead me into what's next? What do you have in store on the other side of this battle? What do you have in store when freedom is found? What are you planning, God? Because I want to know that there's more purpose than just me escaping the hardship of what I'm facing. But what are you up to? What bigger story do you have in mind that gives purpose to me suffering through this so that I can go after what it is that you have in store for me? Not just freedom, but more than that, God, there's more that you have in the story that you're writing for my life. So I want to start reading through more of Exodus together for today's specific message. And where we're going to start, Exodus 1. Is that a good spot? And in the very beginning of this chapter, where we pick up, is the Israelites were living in Egypt. And they're living in Egypt because prior to coming to Egypt, they were in Israel and a famine was coming, and Joseph led the Israelites to go to Egypt to say, let's go escape the famine, we'll be safe there. He knew that would work because when his brothers sold him off to slavery to Egypt, he was actually then able to rise in the ranks of leadership within Egypt, gain power and status there, and invited, even though his family had done him wrong, he, through God's grace, knew, I'm called to help be a leader for the people of God, and I want all of them to escape the famine, come to Egypt where we have stored up more than enough to get through the season of famine. And so the Israelites all come, right? There's like this whole history here with Joseph. He's one of 12 brothers who become the 12 tribes of Israel. They're all sons of Jacob, who's the son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham. So you kind of get a connection here through some historical context of where we're at. And so the Israelites now, they've been in Egypt a while, they're living here, and this is kind of where they built a new life. So let's start reading here, starting in verse 6, Exodus 1, verse 6. In time, Joseph and all of his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Life was good in Israel for the Israelites at this time. And they enjoyed it. They were there. They're raising their families, their kids' kids, and beyond. They've been there a long time. But the growth in the population of the Israelites began to scare Pharaoh, who was the leader of Egypt. Let's go to verse 9. Pharaoh said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. Another movie reference. Anybody watch A Bug's Life? Egypt was like the grasshoppers and Israel's like the ants. Right? The grasshoppers thought they were strong and had all the power, but they recognized if the people get more power, they could overtake us. This is the perspective the Pharaoh had. I told you I can bring Christianity into any movie, right? He's thinking, we got to do something. There's more of them, and they keep having more of them. And if we're not careful to lead correctly through this season, I'm going to lose power. And Pharaoh was scared of that. Pharaoh liked having power. His leaders liked having power. They were the most powerful nation. So he said, we must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, now he's getting thoughtful about the future, he said, they will join our enemies and fight against us, and then they will escape from the country. Right? Pharaoh's really smart. And he actually foresaw the possibility of the Exodus before it even happened. He realized, gosh, if these people get wind of how strong they could be if they rallied together and even joined others who don't like us, they could get free and get out of here. But here's the problem. The big population of Egypt would go, and when you're a leader and you lose a giant chunk of your population, your momentum gets waned and you don't have as much ability to do the things that you wanted to do. You don't have the resources that you want to do it with. And so his solution was then to enslave all the Israelites and turn them into forced labor. All right, we want to keep them here, but we're going to put them in a position where they have to do what we tell them, and we're going to make them do all the dirty work, right? But this backfired. The more that he pushed, the more the people multiplied. I don't know what it was about his commands to the people, but they found other ways to find joy in the nation. So he came up with a new plan later on. Pharaoh's new plan, he realized slavery wasn't working. So mass genocide is now the route that Pharaoh wants to go. He ordered that every newborn baby boy within the Israelite nation, the people group of the Israelites within Egypt, was to be killed. He decided that an entire people group was essentially disposable. We're going to do population control. We don't care about their families. We don't care how this is going to make them feel. We're going to do what it takes to maintain power in the nation. He dehumanized them so he could make selfish leadership decisions, right? Dehumanizing them. There's times in here where he refers to them as the Hebrews instead of the Israelites. Now, to us, that doesn't feel as derogatory. To them, it would have had a different term. It wouldn't have felt as good, right? It would have been a derogatory generalization that wouldn't have felt great to them. If you dehumanize somebody, this still happens in our world today. It gets easier to justify anything. I think our world is pretty good at dehumanizing others that don't agree with us, that aren't like us. And it's easy then to take stands against people who are still human, have families where decisions matter. The Pharaoh found a way to dehumanize tons and tons of people in order to have his way and make the decisions he wanted without feeling guilty about it. What I love about God is that he has a plan, and his plans are always better than anything we could ever imagine. And so God, in this story, doesn't send a massive army to overthrow the Egyptians. He sends just 3 women who hardly ever get thought of and offers freedom through hidden acts of faithfulness in the midst of the story that, honestly, if we go read the book of Exodus ourselves, we don't even always catch these moments as big pivotal moments. But God says there's power in what's happening, and I want you to notice. And so long before we even see the miracle and the freedom of the deliverance of God's people out of Egypt, God is asking for obedience. It's the same in our lives. Long before we ever see the miracles, long before we ever get set free, God is asking us in the middle of what seasons we feel stuck in, will you follow me? Will you choose me? Will you listen to my voice? And will you do what I say? Let's do this together. So today we're going to focus on 3 kinds of faithfulness that can lead to freedom. And the first thing we need to know is that God shows up in faithfulness that is small. You don't have to be big and mighty or do big and mighty things to experience God's freedom through faithfulness. When Pharaoh gave the order to kill babies so that he could maintain authority over this group of people, he was speaking to 2 midwives named Shiphrah and Puah. Let's read part of their story here in Exodus 1. Let's go to verse 15 and start there. It said, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. Now, aren't you thankful for people who have been committed to being good to others throughout history? I love that God always infuses goodness into his people that are willing to do the right thing. It's an obvious win here that they decided to disobey an order to harm children. I would celebrate anyone who disobeyed any order to harm any children, even in our world today. Kids matter to us. That's why our kids ministry, we're all about safety, and our volunteers go through big processes that they don't always like, but it's so that we can share with our families that this is a safe place for kids, right? We care about our kids. This is a big deal moment that's happening in the history of the Israel nation here. But the way that these women stood up for these kids wasn't some big glamorous effort. They just quietly ignored the order of Pharaoh. Right? They didn't go out and rally a bunch of people together and form a rebellion. They didn't launch a social media campaign. They didn't enter their names into politics to start to try to fight over who's going to have their way in all of this. They just did their job, and they did it the way that they knew God would have called them to. We're not going to let these boys die. We're going to stay faithful, we're going to do our jobs, and we're going to do it with life in mind for these boys. And their faithfulness saved lives because they simply refused to violate the godly values that they believed in. I want to read you a Bible passage this morning that I bet nobody in here has memorized because it's kind of a fun one. Proverbs chapter 6 says, "Take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones." Don't you love being called lazy bones when you're reading the Bible? Like, wait, what? "Learn from their ways and become wise. Though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter." Yes, I'm reading to you a Bible story about ants. They're annoying, aren't they? Ants, you got them in your house in the summertime. And yes, I'm telling you that we today here can learn something from God's creation of simple bugs. I hate bugs. They drive me crazy. I don't like winter at all. But I've learned, like, as a homeowner over the years, like, winter's kind of nice because you get some reprieve from insects that want to try to get into your house. But there's a story here that we can learn, so we're going to dive in and say, God, what do you want us to learn out of this, right? An entire species not only survives, but thrives through a combined effort of faithfulness to what they're called to do. It would benefit us, I think, to live with the same humility that an ant has, right? To live with everyone in mind, not just ourselves. See, they're doing their job. They're not trying to gain fame. They're not trying to figure out what's in it for them. They're not out to overtake someone else for their own protection. They're just saying, we're all apart. We're going to do this together, and we're going to do our job. We're going to stay faithful. We're going to work together, and by the end of the day, we'll have enough food. We will survive. This, I realize it's the second ant analogy after I referenced that movie earlier. That was unintentional. But they just do their job. They just literally put their head down and go to work, and they get their job done. And they do it faithfully. And they do it together, right? There's no need to get noticed for individual needs. I think most of our obedience as Christians, as people of God, will never look big or dramatic. If you're waiting for God to show up because you need some big dramatic story to happen in the middle of what you're going through, you might miss what God's up to. There's another passage I don't have reference, but it's coming to mind where it talks about sometimes, the voice of God isn't heard in the earthquakes or the fire or the raging winds that feel so magnificent. Sometimes it's like a whisper, a still small voice where God's just wanting to show you that he's in the little things that you have going on. Sometimes God is in the mundane. Sometimes God is there with you in the faithfulness that you have just for today. And when you show up and do today's faithfulness and tomorrow's, you're walking with God in what he's called you to do, right? Most of our obedience will be small, it'll be quiet, it'll be simple, and it'll bring freedom if we're following what God has called us to do. Which leads me to the next thing we need to know. He shows up in faithfulness that is small and also in faithfulness that is unseen. There's a temptation sometimes to want to make sure that we get noticed for the things that we've been faithful in, to get credit for the things that we have done, right? To get celebrated when we did what God asked us to do. And God, I want you to notice me, and I sometimes might want others to notice me. Well, let's come back to our story a little bit. There's about 3-month time period that goes by after this decree that Pharaoh gives for the baby boys to be killed here. And we read another story here in Exodus chapter 2 about a boy who was born, whose mother does something remarkable, and not everyone always sees it. We get to read about it, but in that moment, she wasn't doing it to be seen. She was doing it because it was what she knew to faithfully do. So read with me here in Exodus 2, starting in verse 1. About this time, a man and woman from the tribe of Levi got married, right? So Levi would have been one of Joseph's brothers, one of the sons of Jacob who became all the tribes of Israel. And Levi, his tribe, was actually the ones that raised up most of the priests, the leaders of what they would have known to be the church. It was kind of like, hey, your tribe, Levi, one of the brothers, your kids and their kids, let's use you to raise up all the leaders that lead the people of God to be godly and do all that. And so a man and woman from this tribe of Levi got married. And the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. Not a great time for this to happen in the people of Israel while they lived in Egypt under this Pharaoh and the rule that he just laid out, right? She saw that he was a special baby. Every mom thinks that about their kid, don't they? I always kind of find that funny. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, because kids get loud the older they get, don't they? Some babies cry loud right out of the gate, but there's some where like, oh, it's so cute, they're crying, you can barely hear them. By 3 months, they find their volume, they get loud, they wake you up every night, all night, don't they, parents? Right? She could no longer hide him. So she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. The standard car seat baby carrier model of the day, right? She put her baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River, right? Let me put him here in this area that maybe he'll be less noticed to try to hide him. And I wonder too, was the water, does that help with the noise? My kids are learning to swim, and Judah put on his goggles and put his face under the water the other day. I was like, Judah, try something. Try to put your face under and just scream. And he did, and I was like, dude, I could barely hear you. And he thought that was cool, you're not as loud when you're under the water, right? So maybe she realized this could help with the volume. I'm going to hide him. I got to keep him safe. The baby's sister then, so their daughter, stood at a distance watching to see what would happen to him. As a father with young children myself, I can't help but imagine the desperation that this had to take. I love my baby. I love my kids. I would do anything to help them. For a mom to put her baby into this homemade basket lined with tar and to set him into a riverbank and walk away. Like, she can't hang out there and watch him. It'll get noticed. She's got to go leave him and try to hide him from what was going on. And for his sister to experience the trauma of seeing what was happening to her baby brother and what her mom was doing, like, can you imagine, like, watching that happen nowadays? That would be a traumatic experience. You would grow up and say, yeah, I had a really broken home. Those are things that don't normally happen in a family with the kids and the parents and what they're doing with each other, like the hiding and the leaving and all of this stuff. All while, as a family, they're pushing through their fears, yet still hoping for something good to happen. Right? If you had no hope, you would give up and you would just let whatever happens. But there was hope behind the fear that was trying to figure out, how do I get through what is happening here? The writer of the book of Hebrews in the New Testament actually brings attention, right? Like thousands of years later, or maybe, I can't remember exactly the year, maybe 1,000, but many hundreds at least. The writer in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, after Jesus has already come walk the earth, he brings reference back to this moment when he's talking about the heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. It says this: it was by faith that Moses' parents, if you hadn't caught on, the baby is Moses, right? We're not focusing much on a lot of his story today, but this is a part of his story. Moses' parents hid him for 3 months when he was born. They saw that God had given them an unusual child. Maybe that's how they interpreted the word special. Now it was unusual, not the parents claiming their child was special. Sometimes your baby's unusual, and other people will notice that more than you. And they were not afraid to disobey the king's command. That's right. We think our kids are special, and other people think they're unusual. And we figure out how to coexist together with all of our families. It's a beautiful life, isn't it? I love what the author of Hebrews is pointing out here. He's pointing out real faith, because that faith was just a parent doing what they're supposed to do to try to do the best for their kids in the season that they were dealt whatever cards they were dealt. And he lists this faithfulness of the parents right alongside of the faith of Abraham and of Noah. And it all happens before Moses ever gets famous. He's pointing out the faith of Moses' family, his parents. See, that was a major deal. To just do what you're called to do as a parent for the best thing for your child so they have the chance to grow up to be the man or woman of God that he's called them to be, that is faithfulness. And that will land you in the hall of faith, just like these people. Do what you're called to do. Even in the moments that feel mundane or even feel scary, do your best. God is in that with you. I wonder how many people here are in their 3 months of hiding right now. You've been facing a lot in this life, and you're thinking, man, I've been through something, and I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Facing a difficult decision, facing a difficult season, and you can't fix it. So you pray with no visible answer in sight. I want to encourage you. Stay faithful. Keep showing up. It's not a failure if you don't have a burning bush moment like Moses does get later on. Keep going day after day. Moses' mom lived in a season that was unseen for a while. You may be doing the very same thing. Don't give up. Don't stop. Stay faithful, even if it feels small, even if it feels hidden. Keep going. And while we stay faithful in the small ways that often feel unseen, the final thing that I wanted to share on this type of faithfulness that leads to freedom is that God shows up in faithfulness that is costly. This is the most unpopular type of faithfulness that we're talking about. It's easy to do small things and stay unseen if it doesn't cost us anything. All the introverts in the room love the idea of doing small, unseen things and having a life that doesn't cost a lot to do that, right? But it's the costly faithfulness that often pays off the most in the end. Again, doesn't mean big, glamorous, dramatic, but costly. Let's go back to the story about the midwives for a minute. Their disobedience, while small, again, they didn't create a big rally, they just stayed faithful. It was something powerfully defiant in its small act. They defied the Pharaoh, the ruler of the most powerful nation, something that could have cost them their lives according to the law. So why do they do it? Why do they risk their lives for the sake of others? Let's go back to Exodus, verse 17 in chapter 1. We read this earlier. It says, because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. Let's go ahead to verse 20 and 21. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. Like their act led to something for a whole nation of people. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. And the words feared God shows up repeatedly in this story. And it doesn't mean they were scared of God, like talking about movies, a terrifying horror movie or something. Like it's not something they're afraid of that's like terrifying to them. It actually means they had a big view of God, something that reordered how they viewed everything else they were afraid of. And they realized, I need to follow him, not what I'm tempted to follow and all these things putting pressure on me that I could be afraid of over here. Proverbs 9:10 says, fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. And Acts 5:29 says, we must obey God rather than any human authority. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit to think about this for yourself this morning. Whose approval are you more afraid of? Your boss? Someone in your family? Your online followers? Or God? Whoever you fear more, that's where faithfulness will cost you the most. If you fear God more than people, it's going to cost you with people. If you fear people more than God, it'll cost you with God. You can't live in the middle where it doesn't cost you something. You have to pick a side, and it will cost you. Who are you going to be faithful to? And who you're going to be faithful to is driven by who do you have the most fear around. Again, not I'm scared of, but I care the most about what they think and what idea they have about my life that I want to live by. God or people, what's it going to be, right? Just a couple of quotes that I found meaningful as I was studying for today. The author Mark Twain says, it's curious that physical courage should be so common in the world and moral courage so rare. Right? We celebrate stories of people being saved from caves and flooding, right? Or we love watching the bravery of people riding their mountain bikes over massive jumps and cliffs and stuff. But again, like it's often not always celebrated that someone stands up for something moral that they believe in, right? And oftentimes, what's sad to me is in our world today, no matter which side of the aisle you're on politically, if you stand up for your moral beliefs, it's getting politicized and thrown back in your face. It's hard to live that out. But it matters to stand by the faithfulness of where you see God at work and to live by the way that you know he's called you to live according to his word. Michael Josephson, another quote here, president of the Character Counts Coalition, said, it is the smaller forms of valor that require the greatest moral willpower. Things like standing up for principle at the risk of social disapproval, economic loss, or injury to career. The smaller forms of valor require the greatest moral willpower. Here's a couple practical statistics that make this a little more real for us. 1 in 3 American workers studied say they would stay silent about a wrongdoing they saw. 30% of people would not say anything about something they saw that was wrong at work. Not because they don't care, but out of fear that it would cost them. Maybe they would lose their jobs or their status at work or the potential for a promotion. They wouldn't say anything about a wrongdoing because it would cost them something. Same study, nearly half of the same people surveyed said that they have thought about quitting whenever staying there meant compromising who they are and what they value. All right? So that's 33 and 50. I don't know the other 17% where they're at, but thankful that at least half of them are looking at what can I do to live by my values here. But there's real people in real scenarios at work having to weigh out these decisions every single day. Similar dilemma, maybe not as drastic about killing babies, but Shifra and Pua faced the same thought. Am I going to be obedient to something that's wrong? Or am I going to stand up for what I believe and just be faithful in who I'm called to be and what I'm called to do? All right? One more detail from our story I want to highlight before we end today in Exodus chapter 2. Start in verse 5 here. It said, soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, she knew whose baby this was. She clarified it outright. We hear her say it. She also knew what her father's laws stated. And she chose the baby over the decree. She chose life of this child at the risk of costing her her own life. So, in what we've read together today in the book of Exodus, in our stories here, we have the quiet no from the midwives, staying faithful to what they believed in. We have the faithful hope of a young mother doing everything she could to help her son. And we have the compassion of the royal princess, all lined up to save the deliverer, Moses, before he's even out of diapers. There's some powerful stuff happening in the faithfulness of the women of this story before the story even gets big and glamorous and celebrated by making movies out of it like we've seen throughout our history here, right? Think of my own life. I've had to make costly decisions, even just being a Christian, being a pastor, to do the right thing. At a previous church, I stayed working there even when it felt like an unhealthy workplace because I felt like my assignment wasn't done. And even though I knew that this wasn't where God called me to stay, I stayed 9 months longer than I wanted to anyway, because I didn't want to run from something. I wanted God to lead me to something. I wanted to do my best to be a good, godly person in the environment that I was in, to be a light to others until God told me, here's where I want you to go. Had to publicly call out a former leader and pastor of mine that conducted ungodly behavior in ministry. And I've personally lost deep, long-time friendships because I've refused to take on the offenses of others. And the drama that they were experiencing in their own lives, I wouldn't choose sides of something because it wasn't my place. And I hate that I've had to go through hard things. And I know you guys do too. It's really hard to go through difficulty just because you're trying to do what is right. Sometimes you're even like, God, why am I facing so much trial over doing the right thing? Wouldn't you reward me for doing the right thing by protecting me from all that? Doing the right thing often means you're not going to be in the status quo. You're going to go against the grain, and people aren't going to like you for it. But again, are you willing to have a costly experience with people or with God? And I hope that we can become a people, and I don't know all of you, but most of you I do know, I think we are. God, I want to choose you, even if it means something costly with others. I want to do the right thing. I want to live for you. God often works in the small, hidden, costly faithfulness that nobody celebrates. You don't have to perform your way into God's rescue in your life. Jesus did the costly, unseen, world-changing thing on your behalf that you didn't have to do for yourself through shedding his blood on the cross, like we sang about, through offering his body, through saying, I'm willing to die for you because I love you, and I want to live the rest of this life with you and have a place for eternity for you as well. All God is asking for is faithful obedience. Again, not to earn his love, but obedience that says, God, because you already love me, I'm going to respond with a yes. I'm in. What do you want me to do? How do you want me to live? Show me, God. I'm in. And so I'm going to ask you to stand, and as we stand together and prepare to sing one more time today, I want to remind you, you don't need the burning bush moment. If you get one, great. Tell me about it. I'd love to hear those stories. But also tell me about the other stories where you don't have a burning bush moment, but you hear the still small voice of God whispering, keep going, do the right thing. All you need to do is make that small, unseen, costly yes to God, one yes at a time. So during this song, ask God to show you what one act of faithfulness you need to do today when you go home, and later tonight, and tomorrow when you wake up, and when you go to work, and when you're sending your kids to school in the fall. Like, what act of faithfulness is God asking you to do? Just put one foot in front of the other, right? He says his word is a light to our path. not a beacon to the horizon. He just shows us which step to take in the right moments. Stay faithful to that and prepare to say yes to whatever he's asking you to do, even if no one knows about it. So let's worship our God, and let's give him our hearts one last time today in worship.